Alright, I'm back with that Mesa dual rectifier, the 3-channel solo head, and got a lot of awful noise on the master volume for the clean channel, and that awful sound at all times on the clean channel. So let's measure that. I can tell that that's the sound of DC present where it should not be. 12.66 volts. I'll show you how to troubleshoot that. The source for that 12.66 volts could be one of two things. It could be coming through a leaking coupling cap right before that, attached to V1B, pin 6, which has got, how much DC does it have on it? Oh, my negative lead fell off the chassis. Just a second, sorry. I am so prepared. 258 volts DC at pin 6. It goes to a 47 nanofarad 400 volt cap through a couple resistors to this master volume. And that could be the source of 12.66 volts DC, though that would be a huge leak. Usually caps, when they leak 300 millivolts, maybe a volt or two. 12 volts is an awful lot. But attached to the wiper of this master volume pipe, there is a mute circuit, another J175, the same thing that failed here on the input of V2A. And if that is a likely source of leaking DC, because it's got a 15 volt supply. So if it's got 15 volts going to that transistor and it's leaking 12.6 of them, that's a very strong possibility. The way I find out is I put the amp in standby. And when I put it in standby, the B plus going to the tube stages is turned off. I'm watching this voltage drop. I'll let you know when the voltage is gone at pin 6, at which point there can be no leaking voltage through that coupling cap. And then we'll see if we still have the 12.6 volts present on the pot, because that would be coming from the transistor, and that transistor supply is always on whenever the amp is powered on. It's not affected by standby. All right, we're down at 9 volts on pin 6. It's draining more. 12.67 there. So the source of that noise is not a leaking coupling cap. The source of that noise is a J175 transistor. Now I've got to find which transistor it is which is connected to the wiper of that master volume pot. It could be any of these transistors, none of which are well labeled, and the schematic just shows that it's a J175 M1, but it doesn't have a part number. So let me find which transistor is attached to that wire, and we'll lift that transistor out and see if the noise goes away. Now those transistors are often used for muting. In this case, on the previous example that you saw in the first video, it was shunting across a 475K resistor, taking it from 475K to about 60 ohms. In this case, it's going to be connected to ground, and it's there to mute at the point you change channels. And as you might have remember hearing this before, when I changed channels, there was a popping sound in the amp. So I suspect all is not well there. But we find which transistor is giving us that 12.6 volts, get rid of it, and I think I've got a bag of 175s around here. If not, I can see if there's another substitute for that. It's an obsolete part. Mesa clings on desperately to a lot of obsolete parts. There's so many better ways to do this than a 174 or 175, but Mesa engineering. Okay, I found it. The wire all the way over here is connected to this one right here. It's good 8 inches away. So let me remove this transistor and see what happens to the voltage present there. Okay, that transistor has been removed, and I'm not hearing that awfulness on the master volume. Just standard hum and noise from a Mesa. There's a ground error there. But now let's check the pot. Oh, sorry, there's resistance. Measuring voltage. 0 volts, 0 volts. All right, so that problem solved. However, something I did right before pressing record, I want to see how bad the thump was when I changed channels. A bit of a thump, but worse, you can hear there's a hum on these channels. Now let's see if there's any voltage on their master volumes. That's gain, that's master. Nope, it was a separate problem. But I'll tell you, that's 2 failed J175s in this amp. Odds are this one over here is also bad. Let me see where it's connected and see if that's the possible cause of the hum we have now on these 2 channels. Because you can't have a high gain amp that does that. I mean, you can. You just put a great big old price tag on it and tell people that rock stars use it, and it's called a Mesa Boogie. But let's see what we can do about that. Alright, they've got... I'm a little bit suspicious of the low voltage heater supply in this amp, which is going to be more apparent on the high gain channels. I guess I should I should power the amp on for this. They've got 4 10 microfarad coupling caps on the low voltage supply. That is not enough, nearly enough filtering for a low voltage DC supply. Not nearly at all. And normally I'd want to see like 4,700 to 10,000 microfarad, not cumulatively, I guess I got about 25 microfarad, which is not exactly the same thing. Alright, the remaining J175 is not leaking, but we have this hum, and it's most apparent on the 2 high gain outputs. But it's there on all channels. We go to the clean channel. It's there in the background on that. Just not as apparent because there's a lot less gain. But on these channels, it's really bad. Now, I suspect that could be because of 2 things. Number 1, on a low voltage preamp heater supply, you would normally want to have 4,700 to 10,000 microfarads worth of filtering there. They've got about 25 or 30 microfarad there. And then they've got a ground reference on both the AC and the DC supply to the heater chain. And that's beyond stupid. It's a recipe for noise. So I don't know whether they engineered that heater supply to begin with. I also don't know whether the caps that are in there are any damn good. It's possible that I'm kvetching a little bit too much. I need to change some tubes first, just make sure it's not a noisy tube. But that level of hum is really not good. And we shouldn't have to be hearing that in the background of everything. Now, if I played right now, it'd be ungodly loud. That's with the channel dimed. But if I were to build an amp with this much gain and you dimed it, there would be noise, but the noise would be shh, white noise. That's just thermal noise from the tubes and stuff. You can't really do much about that other than shape it. But this, that's power supply. That's power supply and or heaters. So it's possible we have a bad cap in here somewhere. It's possible just a bad tube, but it's highly likely, given the way they grounded the DC supply for the preamp tube, that it was never engineered correctly to begin with. But my wife is making dinner, and I'm going to go have some nachos, and I will think about this later. Well, I think I found the problem with this dual rectifier 3-channel solo and the Wookiee. I was concerned that it might be relay 3 with a bad coil. Sometimes when those coils energize, they can make a lot of awful noise, and this is the noise. I'm turning down the master so you can, it's not always in the background of what I'm saying. Because the signal was only happening on channel, the noise was only really happening on channels 2 and 3. And the topology of them is that they leave the wiper of their respective volume pots and all go to pin 2 of V2. Channel 1 gets there just through relay 1. Channels 2 and 3 get there through relay 1, but also through relay 3. So one of the possibilities was relay 3 was problematic. Anyone's guess as to which of these relays was relay 3. And that would have involved taking basically 90% of the amp apart and pulling the board up to access that relay. So I was hoping it wasn't that, for the owner's sake. And I think it is not that. I think what it is that good old standby problem in Mesas. Not standby as in standby switch, just a problem always happens. These little yellow tantalum caps. The way the circuit works is that when you have any of the channels active, this little 1 microfarad is always bypassing this 1.8K resistor on the cathode. Though it's partially bypassed, it's got 100 ohm between the end of it and ground. And that cap often fails, as does this one. This one has not failed. This is a 15 microfarad, and this 15 microfarad is only in the circuit, only grounded on the negative end when you're on channel 1. Now, channel 1 did not have that noise. Channels 2 and 3 did. I found the transistor all the way at the other end of the board, way down there, you can't see it here, that controls that switching, and I disconnected that transistor, so this capacitor is always out of the circuit. And now, congratulate me, channel 1 has the same noise channel 2 and 3 did. So at this point, I don't know whether this little tantalum bypass cap is bad, but because this was in parallel, this would take over, this would serve instead of this, and this would, so the noise would go away when you're on channel 1 and this was active, or whether this 1.8K cathode resistor is not happy, especially unbypassed. When you have an unbypassed cathode resistor, you can have hum. You have noise injected into the tube through that cathode. I'm not going to play around with this too many. There are only 3 variables here, and all 3 of them are crappy parts. This is a crappy capacitor. This is a crappy capacitor, and these are crappy resistors. So it's going to get a new 1.8K resistor for the cathode. It's going to get a new small 1 microfarad, but non-tantalum, and a new, I'll do the math, but I think we could probably get away with a 10 or 4.7 microfarad rather than the 15 here. They tend to use values just because they use those values, as opposed to any mathematical, musical, valid reason for that. But anyway, it's one of those things where an unbypassed or partially bypassed cathode can be susceptible to noise, and bypassing it can eliminate that noise, but also these tantalums fail. Beyond that, the fix is beyond the scope of this amp's budget, because if you get to the point where you have noise injected through the heaters through an unbypassed cathode, the real fix is either to give it a full DC supply for all the heaters. In this amp, only V1 has DC heaters, the other preamp tubes have AC. Or to reference the heater supply to a positive, like 50 to 70 volt DC. And given that this does have a horrible implementation of a DC heater supply for V1, but the supply is there. All those things just go beyond the scope of fixing an amp. They become into just tearing it down and building it back right. And I don't think anyone can afford for me to build a Mesa, or to rebuild a Mesa. I'd much rather just start from scratch and build something nice to begin with my name on it. And maybe one day I'll do a high gain amp and get to put my money where my mouth is. But this is not the first little yellow tantalum cap that's been bad in Mesas. And this is not, if it's the resistor, it's certainly not the first one of these little 3/4 watt resistors that fail in Mesas. They usually fail in plates and cathodes, though, cathodes which have higher voltage and current on them than this. This has only got about 2 volts on it, so it's doubtful if it's the resistor. It's highly likely that it's the capacitor. But anyway, I'm glad for the owner that it is these things which can be done from the top of the board rather than changing relays. Believe me, I've run into a lot of Mesas, the Mark series and the dual rectos and all that stuff, where they have just really noisy coils in the relays, and that becomes a very expensive fix. Oh, just for shits and giggles, see this black wire here? It's attached to pin 9 of the AC heater supply here. They had it glued here to this cap. They consider that a anti-hum antenna, and the premise is that you move it until you get the smallest amount of hum in the amp. Because I had hum, I was trying it their way. 2 things: where they had it glued does absolutely nothing. 2, if you use your fingers, you're introducing more noise than this would steer. And even if you use needle nose, you're still moving your hand close to things. You would have to have an 18-inch long set of wooden chopsticks to position this thing so that you're not actively changing the field in here that you're trying to mess with. And I have used various things like this straw tube where I'm, a foot away. You can move it like that. It does nothing at all.